Hi, I'm Kevin Finch, director of Westbound, the genius of Wes Montgomery. If you haven't seen the film yet, one element is our coverage of Wes's 1965 European tour. And of course, there was also Russia when Wes went to Russia. Wait a minute, that's right. Wes didn't go to Russia, but his music did. And that's one of the great stories you're going to hear in a moment from Rob Dixon, the great Indianapolis jazz saxophone player who himself has toured Russia and other places. That's why we have this great story from him. And also some great observations from Rob about smooth jazz. How do you feel about smooth jazz? It's an interesting thing that's one of those little controversies in the jazz world. But Rob makes some great points that we wouldn't have heard Grover Washington Jr. We wouldn't have heard of a lot of other artists if we didn't hear Wes making jazz accessible to non-jazz fans. So let's hear from Rob Dixon.
Your dad had just so much influence on the genre of music. I mean, jazz, but not only the genre of jazz, just on music in general.
Yeah.
You know, that when I was coming up, I didn't even understand how much influence.
Really?
And I think that happens to a lot of musicians, and then you come to appreciate, like, years later, oh, wow, you know, because of Wes Montgomery, I think this way, you know, because of Wes Montgomery, you know, who's like the father of smooth jazz, or is, you know, I mean, that's how I came into playing, you know, straight ahead jazz, listening to like people like Chuck Mangione and Grover Washington Jr. and Herb Alpert, who wouldn't have had their careers if it wouldn't have been for your dad. His influence just through music is just so vast and strong. For me personally, I mean, you know, I can actually draw a direct line to saying that, you know, your father brought me to the music. You know, that was how I got. You know. Through his influences and through what he made possible in the music industry is how I was able to discover jazz. And I think that happened to a lot of young musicians. And I had a funny, in 2012, I was able to go with Mike Clark over to Russia. And I have a funny story. We went to Moscow, and one of the first cities we went to was Krasnodar. And this guy comes up, his name's Sergey, he's like, he was the boss of jazz of Krasnodar. And then he said, I need you to hear my tape, my CD. And then finally he put a CD in, it was your dad's CD. He was a guitar player, but he identified so much with that sound. And I was like, man, I'm in Krasnodar, Russia, in the middle, you know, all the way across the world. This guy, he identifies with your dad's sound. He said to the fact that he said, this is me, you know what I mean? Interesting, a lot of people in Indiana and Indianapolis don't realize the history and the legacy and just how deep the legends, you know, and the influence that we've had on just music, particularly jazz, in the world. I think that escapes people. Yes, and I think it's extraordinary that your dad played on such a high level, and not only played at such a high level, could articulate like the theory that he did. You know, one thing reading and writing music and just formally being educated about the music does, it's like I couldn't tell you what an altered dominant was before I went to school, you know. I didn't know what a sharp 9 flat 5 or a flat 5 sharp 9 was, or what the flat 13, you know, and the flat 6 are the same thing.
Well, I don't know what you're talking about.
Right, but I'm just telling you, you know, or I didn't know a lot about theory. And your dad playing the music that he played, and to be so the highest level of intellect from an intellectual standpoint and a high level of emotional content, the marriage of that. That was what your father brought to the music, you know, like a lot of emotional, but then this very sophisticated intellectual concept. From somebody that would work with somebody that played like that, I wouldn't even have believed that they could read or write like scores of music, you know. So that, you know, you would think like listening to your dad, he could probably write symphony or 2 symphonies, you know, anything he wanted to do. I think sometimes too, he just pushed the boundaries of like what was possible, not having that, because those are just, reading and writing music are just kind of tools that help you get
to where you
going. They're almost like it's almost like a crutch. Like, okay,
Yeah.
well, I can rely on this, you know. And a lot of times I'm on the stand and I'm with a big band. It's like I look at the chord changes as a crutch. You know, if I had to listen to them just play by ear, I would be lost. I'd struggle the way through it. And I was like, okay, I can look and say, oh yeah, these chords, these go. Oh yeah, I know what that is. It's easy. I don't have to think that much. But to dad to just to exist on that level where the listening and processing it instantaneously.
And
you know that's
it's amazing.
Charlie Parker was such a strong influence on musicians, and because he was into drugs and became a drug addict, a lot of musicians wanted to be like Bird, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, they wanted to follow in that footsteps, so a lot of musicians in New York did drugs. I mean, and if they were, you know, most of them never kicked the habit, you know?
Unfortunately.
And it's even sad to say, you know, some of the white musicians at the time that were able to be very financially successful, like somebody like Chet Baker, he was able to do it for a long time, most of his life, and just be a drug addict. But it was because they want, you know, the way Charlie Parker played. I think everybody thought, like at the time, like
that's what
you have to play like that. You have to be high. Something that your father brought to the table was the fact that, you know, you can be a clean musician, you know, not drink, not do drugs, and still have that genius, and still have that, you know, existential experience with music, you know, that they were chasing, you know, through drugs. A lot, you know, he brought that to the table, saying, oh, well, you know, you don't have to do this to reach that high level of the euphoric state. To appreciate, you know. So, you know, there was I think, you know, musicians from Indianapolis, it was kind of a turning point where the drugs became less of an influence on, like, you know, and that culture, because it was a part of the jazz culture.
Thanks, Rob Dixon. You can catch Rob Dixon around town and also around the world because he is a touring musician as well as being an Indianapolis-based musician, and very much involved in the Indianapolis Jazz Foundation and a lot of other work. So thanks to Rob, and thank you for watching another episode of Further Westbound. If you like what you see, please hit the subscribe button. Until next time on Further Westbound, I'm Kevin Finch.